Greetings and welcome to today's webinar. This is Ben Keller, TAB Business Coach from the home office in Westminster, Colorado. As we begin, I'd like to congratulate each of you on your decision to become a certified StratPro implementer. We believe that StratPro will be a great addition to your TAB service suite and would bring you great opportunity to go deeper with larger businesses and help them transform their business in a strategic way. As we get started with today's webinar, we will be discussing the facilitation of strategic leadership team meetings. This is part one of a two-part webinar series focused on leading strategic leadership team meetings. And in these two webinars, we'll be discussing creating participation, decision-making, facilitating conflict, and managing difficult participants. This webinar will cover the first two topics, and part two will cover the second two topics. At the end of each webinar, there is a short quiz that you must complete that will highlight a few key takeaways from each training. Once you've completed the online quiz, you can move on to the next webinar. So let's get started with today's discussion on strategic leadership team meeting facilitation. And we're going to start by talking about creating participation within a strategic leadership team. We know that there are a few conditions that, when in place, will encourage full participation by all team members. And so we want to do everything we can as facilitator to make sure that we're providing the best possible environment and that we're helping team members feel safe in the room so that they can participate fully. We know that full participation will produce the best possible outcome for the team and the business. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that each participant, each team member feels relaxed with the others in the room. As part of the sales process for StratPro, we do offer an introductory workshop, and that is really our first chance as facilitator to see the team performing together. This will be a clue to help us see how well the team functions and whether there are any team dynamics that we need to be aware of to address as we move forward. Making sure that the team performs well is critical, so if we see that there are any opportunities to improve the team's ability to work together, we do have several team building exercises as part of each workshop going through the StratPro program that can be introduced to help with team building. Some teams will be already high performing, and so those workshops exercises will not be necessary. Other teams will not be as high performing, and the exercises will help to build some team camaraderie and help everybody to feel comfortable together. We also know that participants must understand the topic of discussion to feel that they can fully participate. To address this, each workshop has pre-work that every team member must complete prior to attending a workshop. This ensures that they understand the topic to be discussed and have thought through key components of that topic so that they're positioned to participate in the discussion and the decision making. We know that team members must feel committed to the topic for full participation. We know that people who are not interested in the subject matter being discussed will disengage, and so it's important as facilitator that we keep the conversation relevant and that we're working to make sure that every participant feels that they have a voice and that they need to contribute to help the team and the organization move to the best possible outcome. We also know that team members must have the information and knowledge needed for fruitful discussion before entering the room. Again, we have the pre-work that we'll expect each team member to complete prior to a workshop. That should help them have the information they need. And if there are knowledge gaps within the team, it's really important that we, as facilitator, avoid using jargon from our industry and that we put terms and concepts in the simplest possible framing so that each team member feels confident and comfortable and prepared to discuss whatever issue is at hand. We also know that for full participation, team members must have trust and confidence in the facilitator. It's important that you build rapport individually with each team member as well as the team collectively, and that's a matter of just feeling engaged, getting to know each team member personally apart from the meetings, making sure that they know that you're not judging or criticizing or critiquing any of their contributions, that you're not part of the political environment that might be within the organization, and that you're a third-party objective observer and facilitator there to help the team work toward the best possible outcome. So establishing trust and their confidence in your ability to facilitate is absolutely important, or critically important, for your success in StratPro. And finally, team members must feel comfortable and at ease in the meeting room. This is an environmental concern, comfort concern, and also just making sure that they feel safe and secure wherever they're holding the meeting. We'll talk about this throughout the training, but it's important that when you're holding these workshops that the environment be safe, secure, and free from any interruptions. This also means that the meetings are private so that any employees that might be walking by will not overhear discussions. And this also creates the right environment for open discussion and free sharing of ideas. As a facilitator, it's important that you are actively managing the team dynamic throughout all of the workshops. Again, participants must feel safe to express their opinions and ideas, and this involves even you working with the key decision maker, or KDM, to ensure that they're not going to be critical and that there'll be no repercussions towards any team member if they share an idea or a thought that might not be well received by the key decision maker. So it has to be a very safe environment, and all the participants must feel that they can share freely. One of the tools that we as TAB facilitators use in the boardroom is Tabanos. Within StratPro, we simply refer to this as a communication exercise, but it's the same concept of establishing ground rules and making sure that all team members are contributing to establishing those ground rules for good conduct and safe interaction. Tabanos and the communication exercise are most effective when it becomes the team members holding each other accountable for their behavior rather than the facilitator always calling out inappropriate or behavior that's outside of the agreed upon expectations. We also know that participants must know that they won't be interfered with or otherwise unduly influenced in their sharing of ideas. We want to be very aware of any bullying tactics, as subtle as they may be at times, and that people are free to share their ideas and aren't succumbing to the idea of groupthink or just going along with what the rest of the group is saying. Finally, we need to make sure that participants feel that the organization will support their ideas. Now, this isn't necessarily that every idea will be integrated into the plan, but that every participant's idea will be fully heard and vetted and evaluated for inclusion. When team members feel that their ideas are going to be excluded without thoughtful consideration, they're not very likely to share those ideas. So we want to make sure we're creating the right environment so that every idea is thoughtfully evaluated and considered for inclusion in the overall strategic plan. When bringing a team together, it's important early on in the discussion to encourage an environment where ideas and creativity are free to roll. And one of the best ways to do that is with an icebreaker or a break the ice activity at the beginning of a workshop or a team discussion. These can be as simple as asking team members to share things from their pasts that others might not be aware of. It can be a quick little activity like 2 truths and a lie, where each participant comes up with two interesting facts that are true and one that is false, and then everybody in the room has to decide which ones are true and which ones are false. It's a great way for people to get to know each other outside of the boardroom, outside of the work environment, and is a great break the ice activity. Whatever exercise you choose, the idea is really just to get people to start talking and to begin thinking creatively. We also want to make sure that we clarify the topic. Much like in any meeting or workshop, we want to set clear expectations up front. So we want to make sure we're helping the team members know how long the workshop will be lasting, what will happen during the workshop, and at the end of each workshop, what's the next step. So the middle part of that is making sure that every team member knows what will happen during the current workshop and that the topics are understood and that each member is prepared for discussion. We want to create buy-in by ensuring that every team member's voice is heard and that all pre-work is considered as and integrated into the workshop. As people begin to see that this is the case, they'll buy in more, and if they're contributing to the conversation and the decision making, then it's much more likely that they'll buy into the outcomes. A lot of times buy-in is focused on what's in it for me, so we want to make sure that each leader within the organization has a clear understanding of how the decision or decisions being made will benefit them individually and within their work units. As facilitator, we want to continuously make eye contact with each participant. It keeps them engaged, helps them know that we are interested in what they have to say. But we also want to make sure that team members are making eye contact with each other. So if there's a discussion going on amongst the team members, we want to make sure that they're talking to each other and not focused on the facilitator during those discussions. The use of humor is a critical skill set in being an effective facilitator. Using humor can help a difficult conversation be more fun, or it can make an uncomfortable topic a little less uncomfortable. So using humor appropriately is really important. We want to make sure that our humor is never offensive, is always in tune with the tone and the mood of the group, and that it is well received. So be careful when using humor that you're not crossing any lines or using any offensive or inappropriate humor in the process. We want to manage the participation of the key leaders. Most teams will have very strong voices within them. Oftentimes this is the key decision maker, but it can be other key executive team members. So we want to make sure that we're managing their participation so that they're not controlling the conversation, but that they're team members instead of team leaders. Sometimes this involves having conversations offline with those leaders to ask them to support the other team members by not sharing as quickly or in as much detail, and really listening to what others have to say. Simply, we want to help participants prepare for each meeting. That's the pre-work. That's helping to make sure that they know what's going to happen during the meeting, what decisions will be made during the meeting, and that they are an integral and key part of the conversation that's going to be had. If we have challenges in getting participants involved, there are some activities that we can do to help encourage participation. One of the activities we're going to cover today is really having a discussion partners activity, and this is really just a tool to get people talking. It can also be an effective tool if you've got extremely introverted team members who are not comfortable sharing in the larger group. By putting them in a small group of 2 or 3, it's much easier, much more comfortable for them to contribute their ideas, and then identifying a group spokesperson to share the output from each team can make it a much safer environment for all participants, and also gives you as a facilitator the ability to control the time frame and the time used in each activity. So we simply want to get people talking by breaking them into small groups, usually 2 to 3. We're going to pose a question to the group as an icebreaker activity. This just might be a fun question, but if it's part of the workshop activity, it can be a question that needs to be discussed and might be a bigger topic, and this is a way for you to have smaller conversations and use the outbriefing from each group to fuel the discussion, the decision making that will take place later. Ask everyone to find a partner or 2 to discuss the question, and then the group will report what they've discussed to the entire leadership team. Usually that activity will be about 10 to 15 minutes at the most, and again, it's a great way to take a bigger topic and break it into smaller group discussions that will be outbriefed. Once we've identified or completed some discussion around each topic, we want to make sure that the team is always moving towards decision making. All StratPro workshops are decision-making workshops. They are not discussion or information sharing workshops. So we want to move the group towards decision as much as possible. As decision-making meetings, we want to help the SLT, the senior leadership team, or the strategic leadership team make high-quality decisions. And this is really one of the most important functions that you as a facilitator and StratPro implementer will do for this group, for this team. We want to make sure that the discussion around each question is relevant and adds value so that when the decision is made, they're having great output. we want to give the senior or strategic leadership team a structure for that decision making, and we'll go over a few of the decision making strategies a little bit later. But really, that structure for decision making will help the team make more effective outcomes. The 4 types of conversation that are held during most workshop environments or strategic leadership team meetings fall into the categories of information sharing, planning, problem solving, or relationship building, and we'll discuss each one of these in a little more detail. So an information sharing meeting is really just where we're passing information across the team. It's used for updates, usually reports, outbriefs. It's when we're reviewing past information, making lists, or can also be brainstorming activity where we're just trying to generate new ideas around a specific topic. Information sharing meetings, though, really are not decision-making meetings. It's just simply a forum for information to be shared across the organization leadership team. Planning conversations are usually around visioning or setting goals or creating goals, helping the organization set key priorities, and often are budgeting kinds of meetings where we're trying to allocate resources to make sure that we're working toward the outcome of our plan. The third type of conversation is a problem-solving conversation. This is where we are identifying problems, analyzing the situation, and sorting through the solutions to identify the path forward. And finally, relationship-building meetings are usually focused on team building, across the organization, helping the leaders to get to know each other, to build more cohesion and collaboration across the team. These are usually icebreaker type activities, team building activities, and can even be conflict mediation activities where we're resolving key issues, but in a way that's relationship focused rather than business or strategy focused. In each of these conversations, we'll notice that there are some similarities. The one thing that's different between information sharing and planning and problem solving and relationship building meetings is that information sharing meetings are never decision-making meetings. All 3 of the others do involve decision-making. Planning, we're usually deciding on what the priority is or what the plan will be. Problem solving is usually the course of action that will be adopted to address the problem. And relationship building is on making decisions on how the relationship will move forward. In information sharing, facilitation isn't as critical because, again, we're just outbriefing. We're telling the others about things that have already happened or information that must be shared across the organization. Usually, the team dynamic isn't as important in an information sharing meeting. You can have a dysfunctional team have an effective information sharing meeting because there's usually not a lot of discussion or relationship element to that type of meeting. There's usually no need for closure, as again, we're just briefing information, and usually next steps are optional. Many times, though, information sharing meetings will cross over into problem solving meetings if the information that's being shared is around a specific challenge or issue, or is discussing a new issue that's come up in an organization. So information sharing can cross over into planning or problem solving, but in its purest form, an information sharing meeting really has no need for closure or next steps. In all 3 of the other types of conversations, planning, problem solving, and relationship building, we will be making decisions. We do need a clear process for decision making and how the meeting will progress. Facilitation becomes much more important because we're managing more information and we're moving the team toward a specific outcome. And we need people to build on each other's thoughts so that we get the best possible decision made. So team dynamic and collaboration and closure are all really important. And setting those clear next steps is absolutely critical. So making decisions and setting an action plan for moving forward are all elements of a planning, problem solving, or relationship building conversation. If for whatever reason, as we're working through problems or challenges or planning, we're having trouble getting good participation or identifying good ideas or getting good involvement from the team, we can use pre-decision making activities to move the team forward. And some of those, a couple that we're going to cover today, one is brainstorming. This is really just a group discussion to produce ideas or come up with new potential solutions for problems. Most of us have been participants in a brainstorming activity, and this is really where we're just opening up the topic to the group for new, fresh ideas. As facilitator, it's really important that we set clear boundaries around how participants will behave. For example, we're never critical or evaluating any of the ideas that are presented in a brainstorming activity. We're just capturing those ideas for evaluation at a later time. So the facilitator really needs to be aware of those moments when we might be having some critique of an idea, or an idea might be moving from brainstorming into action planning. So we want to stop those conversations and really keep it at the idea generation level. Oftentimes it's fun to start brainstorming with a fun or creative thought exercise. We want to engage the creative side of our brain as we go into brainstorming, just to come up with new ideas. So a couple of activities or exercises you can use are what is called the paint the picture exercise, where you ask people to visualize something in their mind. So they'll close their eyes and you'll start to describe a scene, and they simply visualize it in their mind's eye. And this is just a way to engage that creative side of the brain. The other activity you can do is to describe your ideal fill in the blank. It might be your ideal vacation, your ideal car, your ideal whatever it might be. Just something that is fun and not business focused. But again, just a way for them to engage that creative side of their brain prior to addressing the challenge. We do want to move quickly from the fun, creative, thought-provoking exercise into the business challenge, just to keep that creative thought flowing. So, allow just a few minutes for either of these exercises, and then present the topic to the group and start recording their ideas. Brainstorming is often used as a big part of the information sharing idea. As we're in information sharing, we usually identify problems or challenges that need to be addressed. And while we're not working towards decision making, the brainstorming activity can be a great tool on the spot to really create some synergy or some ideas around the challenge that's been presented. And then you take those ideas from the brainstorming and move them into a decision-making meeting, which might be either planning or problem solving. Another activity that can be very effective for generating new ideas is the question burst exercise. Whereas the brainstorming exercise focuses on generating new ideas for solving the problem, the question burst exercises focuses on generating questions around a challenge or an issue to help the group or the team think about it from different perspectives. So we're going to start by summarizing the problem or challenge in just a couple of minutes. It's really a high-level overview. We're not going to give a lot of detail, as that can often kill the question generation side of this activity. So we want to keep the overview at a very, very high level. We're going to spend about 4 minutes as a group generating as many questions as possible about the challenge. The goal here is really about 15 to 20 questions, and again, we're just throwing out questions to help clarify or questions that would help clarify what's going on with this specific challenge. We're not going to allow pushback on anyone's contributions. Much like brainstorming, it's not about critiquing or evaluating or even analyzing the value of the question or how relevant the question is. Oftentimes we find the more surprising the questions are, the better, as it feeds the creativity and can lead toward a really valuable question. Participants can only contribute questions, so we don't want to allow them to provide solutions or suggest solutions. So again, as facilitator, we have to be able to recognize a question that's really a solution. So calling that out and trying to stop that solution generation is really important. Just letting people know, again, we're asking questions, we're not providing solutions. No preambles or justifications that frame a question will be allowed, so don't tell us why this is a good question or how you came up with the question, just ask the question. We're going to write down every question verbatim on a laptop or a piece of paper or flip chart so that we capture them. We're going to get them word for word. And then we're going to, as a group, commit to pursuing at least one of the pathways that have been identified through this question generation activity. Some key tips for this activity. We're going to make sure that the questions that are being provided are the most productive, and we're going to do this by encouraging open-ended versus closed questions. We're going to try to keep the questions as short as possible. We don't want long questions. And not only does that make writing them down verbatim more challenging, but often we find that long questions include solutions. We also want to keep the questions very simple versus complex. So we don't want multiple part questions. We want singular focused questions. If somebody asks a complex question, we're going to break that down into multiple simple questions. Questions that are descriptive are usually best when preceded by speculative ones. So we want what's working, what's not, preceded by what if and what might be. Questions become annoying or distracting when they don't spring from a deeply held conviction, if they're not sincere. A lot of times this is when we want to avoid the use of humor in facilitation because it can really kill the thought process and the momentum that the team's making. So we want to make sure that questions are sincere and from that deep held conviction around the topic. We also want to make sure that we're not allowing any toxic questions, so we don't want anything that's posed aggressively or that's in conflict with or counter to another question that's been asked. We don't want to put any people on the spot, so we don't want questions that are focused on an individual. We really want them focused on the topic. We don't want any questions that cast unwarranted doubt on other ideas, and we don't want to cultivate a culture of fear in the questions that are being asked. So we don't want any questions that imply a negative outcome around accountability when the question is posed. So both brainstorming and question burst activities can be really helpful in helping a team to generate ideas prior to making a decision. Once we've completed the brainstorming activity or the question burst activity, when the team has had sufficient discussion around a topic, we want to move quickly to making decisions. And we're going to talk about 6 different decision-making methods that we feel help a group. And we're going to tell you those that we recommend and those that we don't. But we want you as facilitator be sure to choose the most appropriate method for decision-making based on that group and that specific situation. So really, we're not going to always use the same decision method for every decision that's made within a group. So let's review those 6 decision option choices. The first one we're going to talk about is a spontaneous agreement decision. These are usually fast, quick-made decisions. It's when we've got complete unanimous agreement among the team members. The thing to be aware of is that sometimes spontaneous agreements can happen too fast and not be as thoughtful as they need to be, and they often lack discussion. They're best used with very simple or trivial issues, but if you feel that a topic or a decision is based on insufficient information as a facilitator, you should be able to and have the strength to question or challenge or push back on the team to make sure that the decision is the right one and that there really is total unity around that decision. The second decision option is the one-person decision. Again, this can also be a very fast decision and is usually most effective when there's clear accountability. Unfortunately, the one-person decision option often lacks input, as others will withdraw if they know that a singular person will be making the final decision. Occasionally we can get some low buy-in, as not everybody will share the opinion or the decision based on the one person's decision, and it's usually not a decision process that will build a lot of synergy among the team. These are more effective decisions when there is one person that is the expert or is solely responsible for the outcome. It's usually best when the person who has that clear line of accountability be the one who makes the final decision on the action that will be taken. The third decision option that we're going to review is the compromise. This decision type usually involves much more discussion and is focused on creating a solution that everybody can buy into. This can be a valuable tool when there are adversarial opinions in the group. Usually when people have strongly held opinions that are in opposition, we want to get to that win-win kind of moment, so that compromise. The con is that if we're not effective, we can create a win-lose environment. Compromise can create division among the group if it's not managed well. So we want to use this when there are polarized positions and when consensus is improbable. And the key to a good compromise is that both parties have to give a little in order to get to the compromised position. So it's asking for areas that can be sacrificed in order to get to the best outcome for the group. Again, the challenge is that even with that compromise, sometimes team members will be so dug in on their perspective that they won't be able to accept the compromised outcome. So just as facilitator, be aware of that and make sure that you're calling that out if you see that behavior. The fourth tool that can be used to make good decisions is multi-voting. One of the best components of the multi-vote is that it's very systematic, it's very objective, and it encourages and requires the participation of every team member. The other thing that can be helpful with multi-voting is that it limits the dialogue. So we can have a brief conversation, sometimes the group discussion conversation, and once we've brought together the results from that short, limited dialogue, we can move towards decision-making pretty quickly. This also, on the downside, will result in some true priorities not being uncovered because the dialogue can be limited. So we want to be careful that we've got a good discussion enough to really uncover what the key priorities are, and that everybody's comfortable with being able to place their vote because they feel that they have enough information. Multi-voting is usually around having ideas on the wall and giving each participant 2 or 3 votes, and they are able to vote for those priorities that they feel are at the highest, or those challenges that they feel require the greatest priority. And so once everybody's completed their voting, those that have the highest number of votes are the priorities. Again, I'm sure you can anticipate that this isn't always a way for an organization to focus on the right priorities. It just might be that these are the most top-of-mind priorities at the time. So we want to be careful with multi-voting to make sure that we're getting to the right priorities. The next one is majority voting. This one is also relatively quick, as it's just really asking for everybody to vote openly. It can be a secret ballot, but typically works better when you just ask for a show of hands or something like that. It really does generate a clear outcome. Everybody can see what the outcome is. The downside is that we do have a winners and losers element to majority voting, as if there's anybody in opposition to the vote, the majority vote, then they're going to feel that their voice might not have been as heard. So it's really important that before this decision is made with multi-voting or with majority rules voting, that there is a good dialogue and that there is a good conversation so that everybody's voice is heard prior to making that majority vote. The con here is listed as no dialogue. That's the risk. We can actually go into a majority vote too quickly before there's been significant or sufficient dialogue around the topics. We need to be careful that we're encouraging the best possible decision after the dialogue has been made. This is best when there are clear options and if there is division in the group, and that's okay. If it's required that we have a consensus or that everybody be in agreement and majority voting is not the right solution, we want to move towards that compromise, or possibly even a one-person decision-making option at that point. And then the final option for decision-making is consensus building. This one is very collaborative, very participative. It is very systematic. The challenge is that it takes a lot of time, as it requires much more dialogue, and it does require data and members to be skilled in consensus building. And it requires great facilitation by the facilitator to make sure that everybody moves towards consensus and that each area of challenge is addressed fully. Whenever possible, this is the preferred method for decision making, but based on time constraints and other restrictions, isn't always possible. So we want to use this when issues are extremely important or when we need total buy-in on the outcome. So we've got spontaneous agreement, which is usually for smaller issues, and consensus building, which are for the most complex and most critical. And in between, we can use the other decision-making options based on what level of buy-in is needed and how complex the topic may be. So these are the 6 primary decision-making tools that we would encourage you to use. Again, consensus building being the optimal solution, and spontaneous agreement when it's a smaller issue and we can get to a decision very quickly. With that, we have come to the end of part 1 of facilitating strategic leadership team meetings. Please go complete the post-training assessment using SurveyMonkey. The link is on your screen, or you can use the QR code with your phone to access that survey and complete it right away. There's only a few questions, so it should take you just a couple of minutes to complete that survey. Once you've completed the assessment, you can move on to part 2 of facilitating strategic leadership team meetings.